This is your spiritual connection, ourplanetlife.org, broadcasting from Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas. Welcome to DFW Business Hour on ourplanetlive.org. It's an outreach program of Web Chapel Church of Christ. We thank you for joining us. And today we have Alfred Rodriguez, AVP Branch Manager with Alamo Title. Alfred, welcome to DFW Business Hour.
All right, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the invitation.
I was going to ask you, we have a bunch of questions to ask you about the title and that kind of stuff, escrow. Alfred, tell us about Alamo Title Company.
Alamo Title is one of the family members of a large entity here in the United States. We handle a lot of real estate transactions in our area, in the DFW area, particularly my particular office. Mm-hmm. We handle a lot of residential and light commercial, but we handle all types of real estate transactions, closings, issue title policies, our insurance policies, and as I mentioned, we're a family of several different title underwriters in the nation.
I see. How long have you been in title?
In title myself, I've been in over 30 years. Started many years ago, actually when I was in high school, got very interested in it. My cousins were involved in it. That was back in Houston. Moved up here to the Dallas area about almost 18 years ago, and continued with my career up here, and have enjoyed it ever since. This is all I've pretty much ever done.
Great. In what counties does Alamo Title operate in?
Well, Alamo locally, our DFW area, of course, which is all the surrounding counties, your big counties, your Dallas County, your Tarrant, Collin County, Denton, all your Johnsons and surrounding counties, Rockwell, things of that nature. But we do handle business throughout the entire state. So it just depends on what your needs are. We do closings with, we have a lot of sister offices throughout the state.
Also, do you have a bilingual staff to speak different languages, and what are they?
Actually, we do. Right now, it's just I have myself and my assistant. We're both bilinguals. We speak Spanish, and I have been doing that primarily for our niche in our office, of course, of the Hispanic community. Yeah. And so that's what we've done.
Great. I was going to ask you, what are the steps in the title process?
In the title process, it all begins with, particularly in our case, since we handle so much residential, it begins with the contract coming into our office. The contract is executed between the buyer and the seller when they are purchasing a house, selling a house. They've already gone through the process of dealing with the real estate agents, finding the house, and bringing the contract with earnest money to the title company. At that point, we open title, which means that we're going to start the process of researching the history of the property in the county where that property lies. For instance, in Dallas County, which is where we're located at in Dallas. So we go through that process. The commitment, what we call a commitment, which is the commitment to issue a title policy, comes out. We review it at our office because all that's done at a production center. We review it and we send it out to the appropriate parties, which is your buyer, seller, and your realtors, so they can review it. If there's a lender involved doing financing, then they also get a commitment. Once it's reviewed, then the lender, if there's a lender involved, they furnish us with the documents that they want to be signed and closed and notarized. Then at that point, we also facilitate the buyers coming in for closing, the seller coming in for closing. We do those at separate times because we have so much private information between the parties, and so we facilitate it that way. And then once we close, we have to send back, if it's a loan, send back to the lender for their review of all the documents, and then they authorize to disperse. They send us their money, we disperse. We've collected money from the buyer, and then we disperse out to the seller, and if there's a mortgage that needs to be paid off, things of that nature, then we pay that off. At that point, then we close out our file. We have to record documents at the county clerk's office showing the transactions transpired, the change of ownership, plus if there's a mortgage, as I mentioned, the new mortgage on the house. We record that, and then those documents come back to us. Then we send it back to the policy department. They issue the policy and send that out to the consumer. So usually it's a process. It's so many people think because things are so automated these days that it's just a 1, 2, 3 step, and it's still not. So, but we're getting there. A lot of things have been automated throughout our system.
How long is the process?
It just depends. From the time we get a contract, if it's a cash contract, generally right now I can close a cash transaction here in our surrounding counties in probably anywhere from 3 to 5 days.
Wow, that's
if it's a lender involved, then we have to depend on the lender. It depends on how much time they need to do their due diligence to review and approve the customer and get us documents. Sometimes that can take 25 days, 30 days, 45 days, depends on what's necessary for the lender.
Yeah. Also, what is the purpose of title insurance?
Title insurance, basically, the most common policies that we reissue benefit, first of all, the buyer. The buyer receives an owner's title policy from us. It benefits them to secure the title, to ensure the title, that all transactions from the prior histories have been done properly. We review the history, as I mentioned. So many things have to be recorded so that we can review all that from deed to deed, from owner to owner. And then also we check for if there's any outstanding mortgages on the house. We also check to see if there's any other debts against the individual. For instance, if there's any abstract of judgments. There could be a federal lien by the IRS. There could be divorce situations where we have to see if there's any equity going to one of the spouses versus the other. We also have to check if there's a death in the family. Was there a will? Was there probated? So all those things, it's part of our research in order to issue a title policy to the buyer once they've closed the transaction. The other one, of course, is the loan policy. That benefits the lender. They're not going to give money on a loan transaction without knowing, ensuring that they are going to, in most cases, they're going to be in first lien position. They want to make sure if they're going to give $100,000 as a loan, that they have the first lien position and there aren't any other mortgages or encumbrances against that property prior to their mortgage.
Very interesting. Why do you need title insurance?
As I mentioned, most of the time when you're dealing with in a transaction like this, you really don't know the other parties. So you don't know what's happened on that property. You don't know their history of their financial statuses. Yeah. And even if it's a family member, you don't really know because a lot of things are kept secret. If they have financial troubles, as I mentioned, IRS liens get filed of record. If, say, you were buying a piece of property from your uncle and you thought, oh, I've known him for all my life and I know things are fine and he's got a nice Cadillac in the garage and things of that nature, but lo and behold, he's got a $200,000 IRS lien that he's making payments to. Those things affect the title and the property that he may be selling. So therefore, we have to research that. You never know, even though you may know an individual for a number of years, you don't know what affects the property, and you don't want those things to follow you. So unless you go to a title company to get this title insurance to protect you, you're going to always have that possibility of these things coming back and haunting you in the future because it wasn't cleared up.
I see. Tell us about the different types of policies and which are the most common.
Most common, as I mentioned just a minute ago, are your owner's title policy that protects the buyer. Yeah. That's in most cases what we see in a cash transaction, and of course when there's a loan involved as well. We have to do a deed transfer from the previous owner to the new owner, file those things of record in order to be able to issue an owner's policy. Your loan policy, which is prior to recently has been called a mortgagee policy, protects the lender, and again, as I mentioned, the lender wants to make sure they're in most cases first lien position. Sometimes you have a second lien holder, they want a title policy as well, and so you may have a first lien and a second lien transaction at the same time, and both of them may want a policy to ensure that one is in first lien position and there's a second one in second lien position. And again, there aren't going to be other things ahead of them. Taxes are important because taxes could be up in front of them. Your real estate ad valorem taxes could affect the property, so we have to research those as well to make sure all those are current.
Who benefits from these from this process?
The ones that benefit the most, of course, are the ones receiving the policy. Your banks, your mortgage companies who are loaning the money, they want that policy. As I mentioned, they want to make sure they're not going to hand over $100,000 and then later on get cut off by some other item that was not released, particularly a prior mortgage. So they want to make sure that everything's clear so that they're not going to just loan money just out of the blue. They want some protection. As well as the consumer, the buyer, that owner's title policy protects them because, again, you don't know what financial status or the history of the property, and even if you do know that individual, you want to assure yourself that everything's going to be fine. You're not going to have to be running to the courthouse, protecting your title, hire an attorney, and go through that expense. So you want to be able to assure yourself that you have that protection.
Okay, who issues these policies?
Policies are issued, in our case, it's Alamo Title. We issue policies through our underwriter, which is Alamo. Again, we have a family of title insurers that are related to Alamo, and we have that ability to be able to access any one of those underwriters as well. But your title policy is issued through the title insurance company. You have also what we call fee attorneys who are representatives of the title company, and they are able to close the transactions and for the benefit of the title company issue title policy to insure the particular transaction.
I see. What are some of the reasons for title insurance?
Again, you want to protect yourself. One of the items you have to look out for is mechanics liens. That's when a particular contractor's done some work, for instance, on your house or a building. They went through the process of doing all this work and then later on did not get paid or did not get completely paid. If you had a new roof put on the house and for some reason you only paid them $2,000 and you actually owed them $5,000, they have the right to file a lien against this property. So that is one of the things that we do, is to research and make sure that those things aren't out there. Those things aren't going to be a problem for your buyer or for your lender who's lending the money. So that's one of the problems. Another one could be if seller's in bankruptcy. We have to research that because he may not have the ability to dispose of that house immediately without additional orders. Same thing with a divorce situation. If a husband and wife is in the middle of divorce, we have to see what the situation is there. If it's already been completed, who's going to be selling the house? If it's both of them, one party or the other. If there's any lien, equity liens that were established through the divorce process that may need to be accounted for at the closing. So there's different variables out there you have to watch out for. I've mentioned a few of them, but that's mainly to protect the consumer.
Okay, what are the common ways to hold title?
Most of the time, in our case, since we deal so much with residential, it's going to be a husband and wife or wife. Depending on what the situation is, if they're buying a real estate home, it's going to be their homestead, then the lender may require, if both of them are on the loan, they're both going to go in title and then both will sign the deed of trust, which is your mortgage. Sometimes it's just the husband because they're only using his security or his income, and therefore she'll sign the deed of trust, which also gets filed of record, but he'll go into title on the warranty deed. Now you also have, right now you have a lot of family trusts, so you have to have that information to determine who's authorized to execute documents, your trustees. You also have your LLCs, you also have your corporations. So there's a variety of different ways to hold title.
Okay, tell us about escrow settlement and closings.
Your closings, as I mentioned, is the process that we handle whereby your buyers come in to sign documents. Generally, if there's a lender involved, you have all these loan documents. It could be 100 pages they may be looking at and signing. If it's a cash transaction, it's going to be a lot less, but we still have our documents, plus the transfer of title, things of that nature. So each party comes to the closing table at separate times. It could be one day versus the next day for the parties. Just depends on what the time schedule is. And we accommodate them as much as we can. But it's mainly having one come in, the other party comes in. We finalize our part with a funding if they're necessary with the lender, and we close the transaction. Once we're closed and funded, then we're able to disperse to the seller and that transaction is closed. So a lot of people think, well, if I come in as a buyer and I close, for instance, today on a Thursday, but the seller doesn't come in until Friday, well, sometimes the misconception with the buyer is I'm going to receive my keys because now I've closed and signed and I've already committed. But that's not necessarily the case. If there's a loan involved, the lender has to make sure the seller has signed as well. We also make sure all that has happened. The lender has to review documents, and then they authorize to use their money to disperse out to the seller. At that point, we call that funding, and that's when the house becomes the buyer's.
I see. What are the costs?
Cost involved will be dictated by mainly your contract. A lot of things are negotiable in the contract, so it just depends on if you're using a professional, which hopefully many people do. It's your real estate professionals, your realtors. It's important to use professionals in these cases because they know what they're doing. A lot of consumers think, oh, I can save some money if you're a seller, but then they get involved with so many extras that they're not aware of, and it becomes a problem. But the cost involved, generally you have your title policy, and a lot, again, that's negotiable, but most of the time it's paid by the seller, but not always. You have your closing cost, the additional closing costs, which is you have to record documents at the courthouse. You have possibly some courier, Federal Express, or overnight packages. You have expenses for attorneys who drop the legal documents. You also have to research taxes to make sure all the taxes are current. We also have our settlement fee, our closing settlement, escrow settlement fee, things of that nature. So all that adds up. It's not just a title policy, it's different things. But your title policy in the state of Texas is regulated by the Department of Insurance. So therefore, whether it be my office or any other office in the state of Texas, we all use the same chart that regulates what we can charge per the sales price or for the value of the policy that we're issuing. So, for instance, if you were to come to me and your sales price is $100,000, your policy is X dollar amount. That same dollar amount is going to be the same thing if you take it down the street. Those title policies, like I said, we're regulated. Each company has that same value to that policy.
I was going to ask you, who may handle an escrow settlement?
Generally, it's handled through, like I said, like an office like ours, a title insurance. We're a direct operation for Alamo, so it's handled through a company of title insurance. Your attorneys can handle that if they're associated with a company, or if they're handling things that are outside the normal process. In other words, they can do a settlement, a closing themselves, and sometimes they don't have title insurance, and then that's where you have that risk, because you did a closing without researching the history. And again, that's our process to ensure the title, but sometimes those things happen. So again, sometimes there's just saving costs to go through the attorney, and the attorney will advise them that there's no title policy. But generally, sometimes the title policy can be issued with the closing being done by an attorney. Generally, it's done with a title company.
I see. From whom do you get your instructions from?
Our instructions come, as I mentioned before, the earnest money contract is submitted to us, that's executed by the buyer and the seller, tells us what's going to happen with that transaction. It tells us who's going to pay for what cost. There's a lot of times right now you have what we call the real estate owned properties by your banks or your mortgage companies, and they attach a special addendum to the standard contract that we see here in Texas, with sometimes changing some of those standard provisions to adhere to their needs. So we have to follow what is in the contract. We also get instructions from the lender, the ones who's loaning the money. If it's one of the big banks or mortgage company, as I mentioned, they also tell us how they want this transaction to transpire. They give us certain instructions that we have to adhere to in order to handle the transaction. And so that's generally the two items that we get for closing.
Great. What does each party do in escrow?
As I mentioned, you have different parties involved. Generally, you start off with your mortgage company, researching or pre-approving your buyer. And that's important so that you're not spending a lot of time going out there looking for a house for something you may not qualify for. Especially these days, so much has changed in the industry. You really need to start there to make sure that you know what you can afford and what you're approved for. Then you go with your real estate agent and you start looking for the house. So you have a real estate agent who generally represents the buyer and an agent that represents the seller. Both are negotiating on your behalf. You also have, as I mentioned, your loan officers involved. You've gone through that process. The process after that gets done. They have a processor, usually in their department, who a lot of times deals with the title company. And we go back and forth furnishing each other information. And then you also have, a lot of times you have an inspector to do home inspections. You have the appraiser that's ordered by the lender to determine the value of the property. If you want to have additional reviews of the house, if you have, say, a pool or something of that nature, and you want additional inspections done or a termite inspection done on the house, you have the right to do that. And then generally, we as a title company are involved. Attorneys are involved because they have to draw up the legal documents. They're the ones who draw up all the legal documents.
I see. Tell us about closing the sale and division of charges.
As I mentioned, the charges can vary depending on how the contract's written. As I mentioned, most of the time the owner's policy is charged to the seller, but not always. If a transaction is a cash deal and the seller's really eager to get out from underneath it, they may say, I've lowered my sales price and this is, but you're paying all the closing costs. And so the contract needs to be written that way. So that way we know who the charges belong to, what side of the closing statement we're going to put these charges to. And again, it'll vary. The policy is determined on the value, the sales price. If you're doing a refinance, then obviously you only have one party that's going to be charged, which is going to be your borrower. But then it also depends on the loan amount that's being determined by the lender as to what they're going to loan you, and the policy is issued based on that amount.
Great. What type of issues or problems have you seen regarding title searches or closings?
Well, in closings, we have to, one of the things we do look for, of course, is proper identification. We have to make sure that the seller is the seller who is selling the property, is the owner of the property. So we determine, who that is by virtue of the history, researching the history. If the person died, it was maybe grandma, grandpa, they passed on, one had a will, one didn't. Even if you have a will, if you fail to probate it at the county where the property's at, then you have that problem of a lot of people having the assumption that, oh, I have ownership of this property. You have to go through that process if you do have a will to make sure that things are transferred correctly according to the wishes of the deceased person. You also have situations where they died without the will, what we call intestacy. So if they died without a will, well, who are the heirs? If it was grandma, grandpa, and they left it, the heirs are children, but they're adults, and maybe one of them have passed on and they have adult children. We have to go through this process and determine who the heirs are of the deceased person, so that, again, we can assure the buyer that they have title properly from all the interested parties. We have to research if there's divorce cases. If there's an order by the court to put a hold on any transactions, we have to know that. Again, if there's an equity situation that goes to one party, you get a divorce, and out of the sale of property, $20,000 goes to the wife, as an example, then we have to know that. We have to have that divorce decree in order to make that, have that knowledge and be able to put that on the closing statement so that everyone gets paid properly. Different situations, again, I mentioned the bankruptcy situation. You have to be careful about that, whether you're a buyer or seller. Federal liens are important because that affects everybody. Judgments, if you didn't pay your credit card, for instance, say a Macy's or Shell or JCPenney, whatever, and they go after you and they get a suit and they get a judgment award against you. Well, those things get filed of record, and then those things we have to deal with. There's certain protections for your homestead, but then your investment properties are left wide open in that case. Corporations, we have to make sure corporations are in good standing with the state when they try to sell a piece of property. That's one of our research requirements. We have to make sure all that happens. So there's a variety of different things we can, situation, we have, where you have, as I mentioned, divorce situation, you have the ex-wife coming in to sign, and the ex-husband, but he's got the new girlfriend or the new wife. So we always try to keep those separated because you never know what'll happen. There's a lot of emotions when you're dealing with the real estate, particularly if you're dealing with your residential, your house, your home.
Okay, Alfred, where can people interested in contacting Alamo Title call or visit a website?
Our website, www.alamotitle.com. Our office, our office is located in Dallas. We are just north of Walnut Hill off of 75 North Central Expressway, and that's 10300 North Central Expressway, Suite 420 in Dallas. Again, our phone number is 972-587-3377. Feel free to give us a call. Be glad to answer any questions. Again, our staff not only handles closing in English, but also in Spanish. We've been doing that for a number of years here in the Dallas area for over 17 years, and prior to that I was in Houston. But this is something that we specialize in aside from our regular English transactions.
Well, Alfred, thank you so much for being with us on DFW Business Hour. We thank you for joining us. You can check out this program later on demand on ourplanetlive.org. Just go up to the button that says DFW Business Hour and click on demand. But we'll see you till next time. Have a great day.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
You're welcome.